Okay, everybody, welcome to Terra's continuing webinars on eco-friendly landscaping. Tonight we have Bill Ericckson, who's from Rutgers Extension agent. He's been there for quite a while. I've attended many of his talks, and he's going to give us a good talk on biologically healthy soils. So, Bill, it's all over to you.
Great, thanks, Barry. Happy to be here. So again, I'm Bill Ericckson. I'm the agriculture agent for Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Monmouth County. And the extension service basically puts faculty members from Rutgers in all of the counties throughout the state. So I'm a Rutgers faculty member, but I'm focused on more on the practical education and research as opposed to strictly academic undergraduate, graduate-based education. And so the extension service is always here for professionals in the field to keep your credits current, to go through things like soil fertility and soil tests, and to troubleshoot problems that may come up in the field. So you can always call your local county office and we can help you with any issues you might have. So my primary focus is working with the nursery and landscape industries, ornamental horticulture, commercial horticulture. I've got a background in soil science and small farm management. I used to run a small farm with my wife up in coastal Maine, but now we're back in our home state of New Jersey, and happy to be a part of the Rutgers system. So today we're going to talk about biologically healthy soils, and this is kind of a vast topic. So we're going to give the brief intro to soil science from a biological lens. So we'll talk about, you hear this term soil health. So we'll look at a pretty good definition of that and how that plays into plant nutrition, and then how that nutrition also is important for soil ecology. And we'll look at some of the cast of characters of different organisms that exist in the soil and some of the really important functions that they perform. And then we'll just start to get into a little bit of some of our regenerative management strategies. So things that we can do to rebuild our soil health and to maintain the soil ecosystems that are currently in place. I'll also mention too, in the chat box, you might see a note that says, if you have questions, enter them in the chat box, and we'll stop a few times throughout the talk and we can address some questions, and we'll have some time at the end as well. Okay, so this is a good definition of soil health that I like. It's from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS, which is a part of the USDA. And they refer to soil health or soil quality as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And so this is important definition. It's a vital living ecosystem. And I think sometimes we don't take that fully into consideration when we're working with the soil, but it's very much alive. And soil is made up of three basic soil properties. So when we're talking about soil, we kind of break it down into our physical properties. These would be, what the soil is made up of, the particles, the air spaces. This influences how roots and water move through the soil. So we have the physical properties of the soil, our chemical fertility. So the pH, our macronutrients, our micronutrients, dialing those things in for optimum plant health. And then our biological activity, so the microorganisms and the macroorganisms that exist within the soil. So it's usually easiest to start with the physical properties. They're pretty concrete, talking about the air space, the pores, the water, the soil solid particles. And for most soils, we have about 50% soil particles, and these could be either sand, silt, clay, or organic matter, but 50% solid matter, and then 50% pore space, roughly. And in that pore space, this could be filled with water or with air, and that changes over time as it rains or we have an irrigation event. Those pores are going to fill up more with water, and then as they drain, or in a well-drained or well-aerated soil, they're going to fill up with air. And there's an important balance there that plant roots are going to need gas exchange, but also water. And the same holds true for soil organisms. So having all these things in the right balance is very important. So in our physical properties of soil, sandy soil So sand has much larger particles than clay. So clay particles are very small, sand particles are very large relative to the clay. And with that, there's larger pores in sandy soil. So it's better drained. If you think about the beach sand, water moves through it very quickly. And that influences how often we have to fertilize, how often we have to irrigate. We have to do it a little bit more frequently than a soil that holds more water. And it's also going to influence the soil organisms that live there and the organic matter additions. And we can identify the different texture of our soil using this useful tool. It's a soil texture triangle, and it gives you a classification of your soil based on the percentages of sand, silt, and clay. So sand, silt, and clay are the three different size classes of soil particles. And you can see relative to scale, the picture on the left there, a sand particle is much, much bigger than a silt particle and a clay particle. So like orders of magnitude larger. It's not just like sand is 2 or 3 times bigger than a clay particle. It's many times bigger. And these are going to have different structural properties in the soil. So you look at the different percentages, you go up one side of the triangle, you have maybe 30% clay and 30% sand and 40% silt, and you find where all of those lines intersect, and that will define the type of soil that you have. And each one of these classifications has different inherent soil properties in terms of how water and air move through the soil. And this is the ideal, right? Doesn't that look good? Loam. So loam is kind of the right balance. It's the right mix of clay, sand, and silt. Usually, we can include organic matter in that as well, but from a physical perspective, loam is a balanced amount of sand, silt, and clay, where clay is actually a lesser percentage than the sand and silt because it has a much larger influence. So we go back, and we see the loam on the soil triangle here, there's a lesser percentage. There's only about 20% clay particles in a loam soil. And it's because clay can have a really strong impact on the physical characteristics of a soil. Just a little bit of clay can really go a long way in soil. And this influences how water infiltrates and moves into soil and how it percolates and drains down through it. So that pore space, gravel, very large particles, very large pores, it's going to drain water out much faster than sand versus silt versus clay. So thinking about how water moves through soil is very important. And we see these terms having to deal with the amount of water in the soil, because water is dynamic. It's always changing the amount that exists within the soil. If we have a rainfall or irrigation event and all of our soil pores, all that airspace is filled with water, that's when we refer to the soil as fully saturated. So that's a saturated soil. We see that on the right. The soil is holding as much water as it possibly could. Once gravity affects that water and drains out any water from the larger pores, then it's at field capacity. So that's the natural capacity of the water, of the soil, to hold on to water and make it available to plants. And then as plants start to use that water without irrigation or rainfall, the water moves down to what's called the permanent wilting point. And this is a point when there's only a very small amount of water in the soil. And the water, there's still a little bit of water, but it forms a film around the soil particles. And it actually holds on to the particles more tightly than plant roots could access it. So the plant roots can't access that little bit of water because it's adhering to the soil particles, and it's basically unavailable to plants. So we don't want the water to go down to that level, and it can also really have negative impacts on our soil organisms. One of the things that can really do some damage also is soil compaction. So this is when our pore space gets compressed. So all those pores are so important for air and water and drainage and for the movement of roots for the soil. But as we compress and compact soils with heavy machinery and equipment in particular, then we start to lose that pore space and the soil particles get closer together. And so we're not able to have that movement of water and gas exchange. So it's especially important to stay off of soils with equipment when they're wet, because compaction issues are much worse in wet soils, and it can be really hard for a soil to recover from that kind of compaction. And of course, we want to prevent losses from wind erosion or water erosion. So always keeping soil covered. In the landscape application, a lot of the times we're working with mulches or ground covers and things like that. But there is a period, in new plantings, new gardens, newly seeded grass, where there is, we're exposing the soil and we can have erosion events. So we're losing topsoil in these cases. Any of the nutrients that we put into the soil, we lose that, and we want to prevent any of this from happening. Whoops. Field nurseries too. So ball and burlap can remove substantial amount of soil from a nursery. And so you've got to replace that with compost, with cover crops, bringing in material. Subsoil can be brought to the surface when we're digging out a root ball of that size. So on the production side and on the nursery side, we have to be conscious of, that we're not depleting this resource over time by sending large plant material out into the landscape. Okay, so there's a really great resource that the Natural Resource Conservation Service has put together. It's called the Web Soil Survey. And basically what they've done through the USDA, they've mapped every soil in the country, just about every soil in the whole country. And it used to be on physical paper maps, but now it's been digitized into an interactive website. So it's almost like Google Maps, where you can put in an address and it will give you the map, and you can draw a rectangle or a polygon around your property, and it will give you the inherent soil types there. And you can put different filters on it, like farmland classification or drainage classes or pH or suitability for growing different crops. And all this information is available there. So this was a property, it was about 12 acres, a little bit over 12 acres. And you see three major different soil types there. The green being our highest rated soil, and red being, not necessarily ideal conditions for growing plants. So if we're trying to focus our landscape plantings in the areas that are going to be most productive, then we can work with the green areas, and the red areas might need a little bit more modification to become as vegetatively productive. So the website can be a little bit challenging to navigate if you're not familiar with it, but we have just released a new fact sheet through Rutgers last year that guides you step by step on how to use this really valuable resource. Does anybody have any questions?
We do have a comment, Bill, just from John Raffiani, saying that mowing practices are contributing to soil compaction now more so than they were 40 years ago. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Yeah, mowers are equipment, and when we're putting them on the fields, the frequency, if they're going onto wet fields, that can be a big deal. Trailers that move equipment around too. It's not just farm fields that can suffer from soil compaction issues. So yeah, absolutely, it's a great point. Okay, so we have to talk about plant nutrition a little bit when we're talking about soil, and plants require certain chemical elements for growth, and they're going to grow to whatever is the most limiting factor. So for example, if the plants have everything that they need except potassium, they're going to be limited in their growth, their productivity, how they're able to function and perform, their stress tolerance. All those things are going to be impacted by that one nutrient that's limiting. So macronutrients are required in large quantities, and micronutrients are still just as important, but they only are required in small quantities. So just as a review, one of the things that we're always talking about is nitrogen, because plants need it in large quantities. It's very mobile in the soil. It can take on nitrate and ammonium forms, but it's a component of just about every amino acid in plants, and amino acids become proteins. So those are very important for the functions of plants on a physiological level, and it's important for vegetative growth. So we see yellowing of leaves, chlorosis as a nitrogen deficiency symptom, but there's also a lot of things that can cause yellowing on leaves. So sometimes the response is to just add some nitrogen to it, but that may not be the right thing to do. And we have to be careful because this one can leach easily out of the soil, and we have problems if we have too much nitrogen. So in addition to environmental contamination, if plants have too much nitrogen, they'll put on lush succulent growths, or they're going to take up water much faster, and their cell walls actually become thinner. So the plants are not, they're developing basically too quickly. And this, in some instances, can make them more susceptible to certain pathogens and insects, especially aphids. So negative impacts to the plants, and then also we can see contamination of waterways if we're going too much. So plants need it, they need it in large quantities, but we have to be conscious and responsible about the amount that's going on. Phosphorus, also important. Sugars in the plant, DNA, RNA, many enzymes and cell wall function, important for flowering. So if you see, bloom booster fertilizers usually have a lower or a higher percentage of phosphorus for flower development. Also important for root growth and fruit development. Sometimes if plants are deficient, they may give this bluish cast or purple veins, but we can also see a problem with too much phosphorus, and especially with water contamination. So if excess phosphorus coming off of the landscape can get into the waterways, and algae in the water use phosphorus as a nutrient source, just like plants would. And so the algae start to grow, and we have really intense algae blooms. But then when the algae die off, once they've used up the phosphorus as a nutrient, they start to die. And as they're dying, they're using up the oxygen in the water, and that limits the amount of oxygen available to fish and aquatic organisms. So that's why we see fish kills as a result of this chain reaction from putting too much of this specific nutrient into the waterways. And New Jersey actually has a fertilizer law that limits phosphorus application in landscapes. The timing of a phosphorus application, plants have to be actively growing, and it needs to be justified by a soil test saying that it's deficient. Our other major macronutrient is potassium, and potassium has to do with water dynamics in a plant. So it controls water movement and salt balance in plant cells, and it can be really important for disease and stress resistance. So this doesn't mean that you can use potassium as a fungicide or for making plants bulletproof to stress. But what it does mean is that if plants are deficient in potassium, they're going to be more susceptible to, in particular, into abiotic stress. So we see what looks like drought stress, water imbalances from potassium deficiencies. You see curling leaf tips. And this is also a very mobile nutrient that can be lost through leaching throughout the soil. Okay, so also very important is to pay attention to pH, because this affects the solubility of different plant nutrients. So you may have high levels of phosphorus in the soil, but if the pH is too low, they might not be available to the plants. So if you look at this chart here, where the bands are wider on the names of the different nutrients here, that indicates their availability to plants. So most plants are growing in the 6.5, 6.8 kind of range, and we see most of the bands are pretty wide. But then if we go down even to 5.5 pH, our phosphorus band gets really low. In particular, calcium gets more narrow, magnesium gets more narrow. And so we start to see deficiencies develop as a result of a low pH, because the nutrients are not available, even though they may be present in the soil. So really important to have that balanced properly for the specific plant species that we're growing. Okay, so you may be familiar with different liming materials to correct pH, but not all lime is created equal. And so lime is more or less a natural product. It's a mined material from limestone quarries, and it's used to raise pH, so it makes soil less acidic. If we need to bring the pH down for acid-loving crops, or if we're in areas of the country where our soils are naturally basic or alkaline and we need to bring that down, sulfur can lower the pH. So there's different types of lime also. So if calcium is low, you would use calcitic lime. It's calcium carbonate. It's going to raise the pH and add calcium. There's another product, just a different type of limestone. It's called dolomitic lime, and that's calcium magnesium carbonate. And so that's going to add calcium and magnesium to the soil and raise the pH. So you wouldn't want to use this if you had optimum or excessive levels of magnesium, because this can create an imbalance. So magnesium can get too high if you're adding dolomitic lime in that case. So important distinction to know which one to use. Again, sulfur is going to bring pH down to a lower number. And then gypsum, which is also a very good soil conditioner, it's calcium sulfate. So the calcium will bring up the pH and the sulfur will bring down the pH. So it basically makes no change in the pH, keeps it where it is, but it's able to add calcium. So even our acid-loving plants, they still need a certain amount of calcium. And this is the way that we can deliver that nutrient to them without raising the pH, is by using gypsum. Okay, so we don't want to just guess at what nutrients we need in the soil. So having a soil fertility test, it's not very expensive, and it will let us know what needs to go on. So Rutgers has a soil testing lab. A basic soil fertility test is only $20, and it gives you a lot of information. We want to take this sample as accurately as possible and at the right time of the year so that we're getting the best results. So choosing either spring or fall to take the samples, most people do it in the spring, but then being consistent each year, taking it at the same time will give you a good indication from that point in time each year. You don't want to take it in the spring one year, in the middle of the summer the next year. You could have variation based on the month that you take it in. You also don't want to take it right after you apply lime or fertilizer or compost or manure, or if the soil is really wet. All of those things can influence your results. The lawns, if you're going for fall fertilization to get some root growth going into the fall, late summer sampling is good for that. And then at least every 2 to 3 years, you may want to do this every year at first if you're trying to correct some imbalances so that you can see if what you did is having a good effect. So in New Jersey, you can get soil test kits at your county offices or contact the lab online, and you can mail in your soil sample to the soil testing lab, which is on the Cook campus in New Brunswick in New Jersey. When we're working in the landscape also, we're trying to represent a large amount of soil by just, we're sending basically a pint of soil into the lab, and we have many tons of soil in the ground that we're trying to represent. So you want to take a good representative sample, and you take about 10 to 15 cores of soil by walking in random patterns throughout the area, collect that soil, mix it in a bucket, break up any clumps, and then from that bucket where you've mixed up all those different cores from the random places, then you would just take your 2 cups or pint of soil from that and send that into the lab. So you're trying to get a good representation. Depending on where you're having your soil tested, you may have different forms that come back for your results. This is what they look like from Rutgers. You can put in 2 different crops that you're growing. So in this case, this is one that primary was woody ornamentals, acid loving, and secondary was woody ornamentals, non-acid loving. So the recommendations are specific to those types of plants. And we can see we've got a pH of 5.69. It's fairly acidic. That's good for our acid-loving woody ornamentals, but it's a little bit low for our non-acid-loving plants. And if we look down at the macronutrients, we see we've got plenty of phosphorus, but our potassium, magnesium, and calcium are low. Micronutrients, they all are zinc, copper, manganese, and boron are adequate. The iron is a little bit high. We're going to see that often in New Jersey. We have naturally high iron in our soils. And also at a low pH like this, it can often give a high iron reading. So if I saw that, I would not be concerned with a number like that. We see that pretty regularly. But the other macronutrient deficiencies, that is a cause for concern. So in general, this is very broad. It's going to be different for many different plant species, but what we're looking at for, in a relatively optimum range will be about 50 pounds of nitrogen, 100 pounds of phosphorus, and 200 pounds of potassium per acre. Not that we're adding that, but that the plants have that available to them. And so that's kind of a starting place. Some, native species can do well with less. Some really hungry plants might want more. But this is kind of the general guide for where we would base our fertility recommendations. Some labs will also do a leaf tissue analysis. So Rutgers doesn't have this service, but we do send samples out to Penn State. And this is really useful because it lets you know not only, you're not looking at the nutrients that are in the soil per se, but you're looking at the actual nutrition that got into the plant. And so they have, ideal specs for different species. So red oak here, for example, and based on the leaf tissue analysis, they can indicate the optimum ranges for many of our different nutrients. So this can really give you, a snapshot real time during the season. If you need to correct a deficiency, can have a fair degree of accuracy to it. Okay, does anybody have questions?
So we have a little bit of a conversation happening in the chat here, and it revolved around a question that Barry had, and he wanted to know if there's a follow-up on studies on how effective the NJ fertilizer law has been in reducing the potassium phosphorus runoff.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, but Dr. Jim Murphy, who's the director of the Center for Turfgrass Science, he was instrumental in helping to write that fertilizer law. So he may have some insight into that.
Yeah, that would be good to know, because John Raffiani saying in there that less potassium available or less phosphorus available in the fertilizers is still allowed for seed establishment. Other than less phosphorus available in fertilizers, it's still allowed for seed establishment. And I think it's overused, he says. However, many in the trade acknowledge that it should be avoided unless soil testing is done, which I think is wise. Totally.
And it's hard to enforce, like anything as well. And I think just, more education is important, the impacts. And I think that's a great point to see, is this really effective? Does it need to change? Does it need to be reevaluated, or to have some additional level of enforcement? So hopefully it's a start. Hopefully it's doing some good to protect our waterways in particular. Okay, so let's talk about biology. Yep, go ahead.
The slide you have up here is what changed my whole attack on pesticides, not the pesticides, but it changed my whole attitude on how to grow healthy plants rather than dealing with pesticides and this and that. But because I found that if you get the soil right, and especially with the biology in there, the plants develop much stronger resistance to disease and insects, drought, and all kinds of things. Not perfect, but I'm in South Jersey, where there's a lot of sandy soils and not as much organic matter as we'd like. But what we've seen is, it could take a few years to improve the soil biology and increase the percentage of soil organic matter. But once that kicks in, it just makes so much difference, makes everything easier to accomplish.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Remember that definition from the NRCS: soil is a vital living ecosystem, and it's the foundation for plants, animals, and humans on the planet. And it's not instantaneous. Like you're saying, it takes time for that to kick in. We're working with living organisms that we can't see and can't even identify all of them that exist, let alone know all of the functions that they're performing. So we can do the best we can to try to give them what they need based on our understanding of soil science. And really the biggest thing we can do is adding organic matter. You have sandy soil, add organic matter. You have clay soil, add organic matter. Protect the organic matter that exists and add more is kind of like the number one way that we can, that's really the secret to it.
To a lot of people in the industry, it's like new news, but I have books that were written 100 years ago talking about it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's incredible. It's, so in one spoon of soil, one teaspoon, 600 million bacteria, 3 miles of fungal hyphae, the little threads of fungi, if you were to stretch them out, it'll be 3 miles long, 10,000 protozoa, 20 to 30 nematodes. It's just incredible. One teaspoon. And it shows, the limits of our understanding too, of what's actually going on.
Yeah.
Bill, we have a comment about,
Okay.
John says, constant liming has led to pH readings being too alkaline. And maybe you can talk about the alkalinity as it relates to the biology, or maybe, just to lead into what you're talking about here.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's an important point too. If you're just doing lime, on a calendar schedule or every year without doing a soil test, we can go too far alkaline as well. And there's other areas of the country that have more naturally alkaline soils, but that can be just as bad of a problem as being too acidic. We can see other nutrients become less available to plants, and it creates an inhospitable environment to our soil organisms. So just like plants want to operate in a certain pH range, our soil organisms, they're alive too. They're living organisms, and they have a range that they can exist within as well. So important to have an accurate soil test and only apply what's needed. So many really interesting creatures, and without going into all of them, so the picture on the right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but on the right side, the one in the middle, the one that looks like a little orange organism with a few legs on it, that's a tardigrade or a water bear, it's called. They're found all over the planet. They live in aquatic systems. They can live in like thermal vents. They can dry out and become revived. And they're sort of classified as a micro animal or something. They defy classification, and they exist within the soil. They cycle nutrients. They survive. And it's just, the diversity that exists in all these organisms interacting with one another and performing different functions is profound.
One of the counts I see and hear about, but I usually see and hear, this is again from Lane Ingham, but she counts billions of bacteria in each teaspoon. So more bacteria in that one teaspoon than there are people on Earth.
Yeah, that's wild. So organic matter, the biggest thing that we can do to help these organisms and to build our soils. And so what we're talking about is living and previously living carbon-based components of the soil. So it's decomposing leaves, it's decomposing grass, but it's also the living plant roots and the living organisms. They're a part of soil organic matter too. It's everything that is either alive or once was alive. So they're moving nutrients around. Some things are breaking down organic matter and releasing the nutrients, and other things are being the things that are being broken down. So it's a food source. It enhances the biological activity. It helps to improve the soil structure, to hold on to nutrients better, to allow water and air to move through it a little better, reduces erosion. It improves the cation exchange capacity, so the soil's ability to hold on to cations like calcium, magnesium, potassium. They can stick to the organic matter particles in a way that makes them accessible to plants. And this is, just the biggest thing that we can do is to enhance and protect the organic matter in the soil. So cation exchange capacity, organic matter, humus particles, and clay particles also have a negative charge, and that negative charge holds on to the cations. But I kind of think of it like Velcro almost, like they're stuck to it, but the plant roots can get the nutrients when they need them. So the cations are not leaching away They're not being dissipated throughout the soil, but they're held in place and available to plants as needed. You can think of it as a bank account. You have to make some investments at first in the organic matter. It's going to take time to realize your return on investment, but you're putting into your long-term soil organic matter account. The living organisms are kind of like the bank tellers, right? They're moving organic matter around, transforming it into nutrients, fresh residues that are actively being consumed. That's like checking account. So it's easily accessible, it's releasing nutrients. And then longer term decomposing organic matter is like your savings account. So it's taking a longer time to break down, having an important function on the physical characteristics of the soil, providing habitat for the organisms and a long-term food source, and then really stabilized long-term organic matter like humus. That's like the retirement account. And those are compounds that are hard to break down, but it's a stable carbon source within the soil. So these are kind of like this analogy to look at all of those different aspects of this investment in the land. And soil is actually breathing, it's respiring. So there's especially in forest ecology, soil forest ecology studies, they'll measure the biological activity of the soil by the amount of carbon dioxide that's being released. And so more active soils where the organisms are breaking down more material are going to release more carbon dioxide, so they're respiring. And so there are soil tests you can send to the lab. There's a test called the Solvita test, and it will actually test this, the amount of carbon dioxide being produced by your soil as an indication of how active the microorganisms are. So one of the first parts of soil organic matter are the plant roots, right? It's the way the plant interacts with the soil, and it actually influences the soil physical structure. So the roots are helping to build soil aggregates, stable soil kind of clods of soil particles together, and sloughed off cells from the roots. So root cells that are coming off and root exudates. So roots are always releasing sugar. They're releasing carbohydrates and different compounds that can actually feed the microorganisms that surround them. So it kind of creates like a little coral reef of high biological activity. And this is called the rhizosphere. It's the area surrounding a root where there's more activity than other areas of the soil. There's actually some really interesting research looking at the different signals in the compounds that plants are putting out, where if they're more drought stressed, for example, they're going to release certain compounds that would feed microorganisms that would help to support the plants through drought stress. So kind of inviting the different microorganisms that would help with that stress response to the plants. So really interesting stuff, kind of cutting edge research in that area. And our microbes are performing a lot of different functions. They're decomposing and breaking down organic matter. We have bacteria in particular that can fix nitrogen and bring the nitrogen out of the atmosphere and into the soil and into the root zone. They can help to detoxify and break down chemicals, suppress disease, stimulate plant growth, and produce compounds that can actually lead to improved stress tolerance. So kind of the most simple organism are bacteria. They're single-celled individual organisms, and they are usually best thriving in well-aerated soils with a neutral pH. So too far alkaline, like we're talking about, this can influence the balance. They're primary decomposers. They make nutrients more available to plants, and there are some bacteria that play an important role in improving stress tolerance. And some of the research that we're working on at Rutgers is focusing on that. There are some bacteria that can fix nitrogen. They're called diazotrophs. You may be familiar with rhizobia, which are a type of diazotroph that form associations with the roots of legumes. So clover, peas, beans. If you were to look at the roots on the bottom there, you can see those little nodules. That's the bacteria living inside the root system. And then the picture on the bottom right is a zoomed in microscope slide, electron microscope slide. And we can see that nodule is bursting with bacteria. They're filling that nodule from the plant. And so what's happening is the bacteria are able to get nitrogen for the plant, from the air, from the soil pores, the air that's in the soil pores. It's, there's nitrogen in the atmosphere. And so they give that to the plant and they get sugars in return. So it's a symbiotic relationship, and it allows these plants to colonize areas of lower fertility. But also all of that nitrogen that's coming out of the air and going into the plants, when that gets mowed and returned to the soil or composted and breaking down, all that plant leaf material has free nitrogen that came out of the atmosphere. So if those types of plants become a part of the system, they're able to supplement that nitrogen. And there are also free-living soil bacteria called azotobacter, for example. They don't even need roots to form an association with. They live within the soil, in the rhizosphere, and they're still able to fix nitrogen. So by creating the right conditions for them, we can encourage that habitat and have them exist, even if our plant species are not the ones that are not legumes. We have some nitrogen fixing trees as well. Black locust, honey locust, their roots are going to form associations with bacteria to have this symbiotic relationship as well. Whoops. And some nitrogen fixing shrubs and herbaceous perennials. So 3 different native plants here: sweet fern, bayberry, false blue indigo, baptisia. All these plants have a capacity to form relationships with bacteria that can fix nitrogen. So incorporating them in part of the landscape can support those ecosystem services. Whoops, looks like we skipped the end. Does anybody have questions? Correcting this. Okay, great. So one of the things that we've been actively researching at Rutgers, and I've been involved with this, working with the Center for Turfgrass Science, are plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, or PGPRs. And they are certain bacteria species that can improve plant productivity and stress tolerance. And so they can do this through several different mechanisms. One is by producing phytohormones, so auxin, which is involved with root growth, for example, or cytokinins, which can help with abiotic stress, protect chlorophyll from breaking down, in particular heat stress, can also help with tiller development in turfgrass. These bacteria can also make nutrients more soluble, in particular phosphorus. They can produce compounds called exopolysaccharides, which are sticky, sugary coating that forms on the outside of the bacteria. So in times of drought stress, the bacteria wants to protect itself from drying out, and it produces these coatings to protect it, and that also gets onto the roots. So it's kind of this shared relationship. And then one of the major mechanisms that we've been looking at is an enzyme called ACC deaminase. And some of these bacteria produce this enzyme. And what this does is that it breaks down one of the precursors to ethylene in plants. So when plants experience abiotic stress, they produce ethylene. So it's a naturally occurring hormone in plants. And when they're stressed, it's a signal molecule. So they produce ethylene, but it leads to leaf senescence, thinning of the turf canopy in turfgrass applications, yellowing, things like that, and slowing down of growth. The plant is basically using ethylene as a signal to protect itself, and shut down growth from stress response. So the bacteria are able to break down the precursor to ethylene, which is a compound called ACC, and it allows the plant to have lower levels of ethylene even through stress. So we don't see leaf senescence or chlorosis or thinning canopy and reduced turf quality. So we've been testing out different microbes that we found growing in native grasses in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. So it's a really dry, sandy, acidic, inhospitable condition, and there are plants that thrive there. So we've been investigating the symbiotic relationship between the plants and the microbes that live there, and then culturing those microbes and testing them out to see if we can put them into the roots of turfgrass species to ultimately reduce water use, improve heat tolerance, reduce fertilizer use. So that's kind of new research, some new things going on at Rutgers, and some products are starting to come on the market with bacteria that contain this enzyme, but you're probably going to see more of that in the future as well. Something that might be a little bit more familiar is mycorrhizal fungi. These are fungi that form symbiosis with the roots of nearly all plants, and they help with making nutrients more available, drought tolerance, disease resistance, improving soil structure, taking up water. They're making sticky secretions to help build bigger soil aggregates. And so it's basically like an extension of the root system. So the fungi extend out from the roots. They're able to bring the nutrients and water to the plants. And again, they get sugars in return. And these are soil aggregates. And the fungi, the threads of the fungal hyphae, help to hold those aggregates together. And it creates large and small pore spaces. Again, to use the coral reef analogy, larger soil organisms can fill the larger spaces, and smaller soil organisms can kind of hide out in the small spaces and occupy them. So it allows them to escape being eaten by the other organisms. And so it creates a whole more complex network holding the soil together, and it's loosely held together in healthy soil aggregates, allowing roots to move through them, and water and air and gas exchange as well. Protozoa, these are mobile soil organisms, single-celled, and they are predators. So they're gonna, their primary food source in a lot of cases is bacteria. And this is important for nutrient cycling because bacteria generally contain more nitrogen than a protozoa needs. So the protozoa moves through the soil, it eats the bacteria, it takes the nitrogen it needs, and then it releases the rest, it excretes it into a form that's available for plants. So they're basically absorbing the nutrition from the bacteria and releasing the excess for plants. So important for nutrient cycling, nitrogen mineralization, moving that and cycling it throughout the soil. Nematodes get a bad rap a lot of the times, and some of them are really bad, harmful pathogens. But there are many beneficial nematodes. A lot of them are breaking down organic matter, consuming other organisms, and cycling nutrients through the soil. And there are actually soil health tests that will look at nematode diversity as an indication of soil health. So a healthier soil can support higher levels and complexity of different nematodes. So important component of healthy soils, really important for nitrogen cycling. And some can actually help to parasitize or kill pests. So cabbage looper, grubs, there are different nematodes that can take these out.
Bill,
yep, go ahead.
The picture on the bottom left is one of my all-time favorites. I love that one.
You want to explain the caption on that one?
You got me. I can't see the caption, but
so yeah. So what we have there, two different organisms interacting with one another. We have a nematode that's being caught in a ring, and the ring is dissolving the nematode and parasitizing it. So it's, interaction of the two different organisms there that's actually being caught, and the nutrients being dissolved. So there's this whole other world occurring within the soil.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I was told that there are also, this is a bad nematode. It causes damage, but there's also good ones. And from what I've been told is they're a lot smaller, so they'll slip right out of the fungi and go on doing their good work.
Totally. Earthworms, macroorganisms, important component of the soil as well. So our night crawlers and manure worms, these are the ones that we see most commonly in mid-Atlantic, and they're mixing residues, they're breaking down organic matter, they're excreting their worm castings that are high in plant available nitrogen, calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. You can bring nutrients and organic matter deep into the soil, create channels for roots and water to move through. So I put the picture on the bottom. So that's a giant blue earthworm. And those are found in it's either Australia or New Zealand or both. So we don't have those here, but I put them on there just in case anybody ever sees one, to let us know about it and just to illustrate the diversity. I mean, before I saw that, I never knew that that organism existed on the planet, and it's kind of incredible. So, tremendous diversity within the soil.
Are you seeing any of those jumping worms in New Jersey?
We are starting to see some reports of them. Yes, and they can be really big problems, especially in forest ecosystems, breaking down leaf litter and decomposing the organic matter too quickly. They can be really aggressive. So we are starting to see those.
Do they have any natural predators here?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if anyone else knows about that, but I don't think we have a solution for that yet.
Okay. I'm just going to put it out there too, that I will jump out of my skin if I ever run into one.
We do have larger organisms too, secondary, tertiary consumers, breaking down organic matter, breaking down big pieces of leaves, even slugs. We don't want to see them in the garden necessarily, but they're cycling nutrients. They're breaking down organic matter, which unfortunately, happens to be our plants sometimes, but they have a function and a role in the ecosystem. And so really this just points to the fact that this is complex. Just like we have a food web of above ground terrestrial organisms, within the soil, we have these cycles and these complex interactions occurring as well. So I put this picture up because it illustrates the interface of a managed and an unmanaged forest landscape. And I like to use the forest as our example because we have a thin layer, but a constant layer of organic matter in leaf litter. And that provides nutrient cycling to support huge plants. I mean, the trees that are growing in the forest are not receiving fertilizer, they're not getting nutrients, they're not getting irrigated artificially, and they're tremendous biomass production and carbon sequestration. And it's all because of that constant organic matter layer and that cycling that's occurring. So we can use that as a model for our managed landscapes. And basically it boils down to these two things: adding diverse food sources for our soil organisms, so food and habitat for them, and minimizing soil disturbance. So we need to create the conditions to promote our microbes. Compost being one of the biggest things that we can do. It adds organic matter, adds nutrients, but it's also inoculates the soil with lots of beneficial microbes. So all the microbes in a compost pile are good at cycling nutrients and breaking down organic matter and releasing it and turning it into compost. So when we're adding that, we're inoculating the soil with those microbes that are very good at those functions. It also helps to improve the structure, physical properties of the soil as we add it. For our perennial systems, especially leaf compost is a really good option. It's made from perennial plants, right? Leaves are from trees, from perennial species. It's a little bit lower in nutrients than manure-based composts, higher in carbon, and so it adds organic matter, improves the biology, but it does it in a more of a gentler way that matches the needs of our perennial landscape plant species. Organic mulches, straw, leaves, grass clippings, trying to leave some of our leaf material in our garden beds throughout the winter is starting to be a trend in the industry that's catching on with some landscape professionals. And this has a benefit for protecting the soil, creating habitat for microorganisms, for beneficial insects. So lots of benefits there. We do have to be careful. We want to clean up any diseased material, diseased leaf material, taking that out of the system, but healthy material, can be left in garden beds. Bark
Bill,
mulch.
I just wanted to talk. Several years ago, I saw a study from the University of Michigan on mulch mowing leaves and just mulching it and place and leave it. And they found out that it actually reduced weeds from germinating the next year.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a unexpected benefit, but that's great. Yeah, lots of benefits there. Mulching too. So we use bark mulch, aged wood chips, natural mulch materials, natural hardwood chips, bark mulch. Not, the dyed materials are not necessarily ideal. Want to use as natural of materials as possible, and especially in our perennial systems. This can be a great addition.
Bill, what is a good amount of time to consider a wood chip or a pile of wood chips aged?
I would say at least a year. It depends on the conditions and the wood species, and if there was any leaf material in there to help it break down. But I'd say at least a year is probably good. And with mulching, we need to do it properly. So this is my slide of bad mulching practices. So we never want to create these volcano mulch piles. I don't know about other parts of the country, but this has become very common in New Jersey, where you see the mulch piled up the base of the tree. And this can be really bad for the tree because that part, the base of the trunk of the tree, needs to be exposed. There's gas exchange happening there. There's bark that does not want to be underground, and it essentially has the same effect as planting the tree too deep if you bury it in mulch. So we can see, structural failure, disease problems. We can see borers get in there. So lots of problems with over mulching trees and piling up that volcano mulch.
And Rutgers has done a great job getting this information out here and doing it for over a decade. And I still see it all over the place.
Yep. Yeah. We have a fact sheet on it. And it's just, more education. The proper way, you want to see that root flare of the tree. You don't want to see the tree looking like a telephone straight going into the ground. You want to see a root flare start to come out at the base, and the mulch, 1 to 3 inches of mulch, not necessarily touching the base of the tree. So spread out, distributed from the tree. And mulch is great. It's excellent organic matter for weed suppression and feeding the microbes, keeping moisture in it. It's excellent, but it just has to be done properly. And so really, we're looking for soil quality and soil health, using the forest as an example. We want to have good tilth, spongy soil that's not compacted, to have good rainfall penetration and drainage, optimize our soil fertility, increase the organic matter, and this is going to lead to our high population of organisms, earthworms, and microbes, and help to reduce our pest and disease problems or reliance on additional fertilizers. So that's what I have for today. And there's my contact information. We can share this with you. I'm happy to help or answer any questions or help interpret soil tests in the landscape if they come up. And if we have any more questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Well, I do want to say that, Bill, you have covered so much ground in the past hour, and a great job communicating it too. So I really do appreciate your job, and we will be asking you to come back again.
Great, happy to come back.
Sure. And so I want to close out on a note. We just had Earth Day, and I can remember the first one back in 1970. That's how old I am. But I think it's really important to point out that this planet is a paradise for living beings. Every single inch, millimeter, whatever, it has life in it. And like, you did a great job explaining all the interconnections and everything of it. And it's a precious planet that we have, and we all need to do something better to protect our planet. I'm going to close with a book that was written many years ago, The Closing Circle, by Barry Commoner, who was an ecologist, and he put the four laws of nature, and it's number one, everything is connected to everything else. Number two, everything must go somewhere. Number three, nature doesn't waste anything. And number four, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Everything's going to have a reaction. It could be positive, it could be not positive, but I think if we concentrate on those four laws, we can have a much better success in the landscape industry and keeping this planet healthy for more generations to come. So I'm off my soapbox now.
I have a couple questions, one for Bill and then one for Barry. Bill, are they still teaching organic land care standards at Rutgers? Because I haven't seen it. I don't know that it's on your campus, but maybe somewhere within Rutgers they are or they aren't?
Yes. So there's the organic land care program. And so Michelle Backus is one of the leaders on that. She's out in the Middlesex County office. So you can reach out to her or reach out to me and I can put you in touch with her. There's also a free downloadable manual by PDF that you can download that has the information from the organic land care program. And then for folks who do go through the program, we have a listing of graduates from that, for people who are looking for more natural land care. They can look for folks who have gone through this program.
Right. Yeah. I'm a graduate.
Nice.
Fantastic. I didn't take it at Rutgers, but I'd be interested to see what, if any, differences, or if it's just exactly the same. I'd be just curious about that.
Well, you can get the standards through Rutgers and see that.
That's fantastic.
And I can give you Michelle's number to call.
Oh, good. And Barry, I'm curious, where can you find the recording of this? Where will people be able to access the recording?
Well, geez, it's really hard. You have to go to terraenvironmental.com. And I think everyone this year has been recorded. So it's available whenever you want to go to the website and watch these things. And there's also, for anybody who's attended, you can go there up until May 3rd and use that promo code and get $25 off of your purchase. And we have a lot of very good soil building products that are both liquid and solids. And one of my favorites is it's a granular vermicompost, worm castings with humates in it. So rather than having to do a complete top dress, you can put it in a spreader and 10 pounds per thousand, rather than putting a whole lot of the compost out, and it really works wonders.
Fantastic. Well, we are out of questions and we are just a few minutes over time. So Barry, did you want to tell us about next week's class?
Yep, I can do that. Next week we have Eric Maurer. He's with Neudorf, the makers of Fiesta, which is a bioherbicide for broadleaf weeds. It's iron-based. It's been around for quite a while. Well, I have to say this. Terra was the first distributor of Fiesta in the United States. So that's it.
Hey, a little pat on the back, Barry, never hurts. Good job on that. And Bill, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. There are thank yous up and down in the chat box, and just wanted to say thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Bill. Good night, everybody.